What if the old, dark, worn Australian halfpennies sitting in a jar or forgotten coin collection were actually worth tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of dollars? Coins like the 1916, 1917, 1919, 1921, and 1932 Australian Commonwealth One Halfpennies may look small, dirty, and badly worn, but some rare examples have shocked collectors by reaching prices from $70,000 to over $400,000. The incredible part is that many of these valuable coins don't look special at all, which means a life-changing treasure could easily be hiding in plain sight. Let's moving on. First up, the 1916 Australian Commonwealth One Halfpenny Mule is one of the most fascinating error coins ever connected to Australian numismatics, and it proves how a tiny minting mistake can turn an ordinary coin into a legendary collectible worth extraordinary money. At first glance, it may look like just another worn early 20th century halfpenny, but when specialists study it carefully, they realize this coin was created using the wrong combination of dies. That mistake produced what collectors call a mule coin, meaning the front and back dies were never meant to be used together. Because only a very small number were struck before the error was corrected, the coin has become one of the most famous and valuable Australian coin varieties known today. This piece was struck in 1916 during the reign of King George V, a period when Australia was still producing its early Commonwealth coinage. The obverse of the coin shows the classic portrait of King George V facing left. The portrait was designed by the well-known sculptor Sir Edgar Bertram Mackennal and was used across many British Empire coins during that time. Around the portrait runs the Latin inscription Georgivsvdgbrittomn, Rex Fdind, Imp, which translates to George V by the grace of God, King of all the Britons, Defender of the Faith, Emperor of India. Even on worn coins, parts of this legend are usually still visible and help collectors identify the piece. The reverse side of this coin is very different from the famous kangaroo design people often associate with early Australian halfpennies. Instead, this mule carries the reverse design that shows the denomination written clearly as 1 halfpenny in the center. Around the outer edge appears the inscription Commonwealth of Australia, and the date 1916 sits at the bottom. The design is surrounded by a decorative beaded border that frames the lettering. This reverse style looks simple compared to later Australian coin designs, but it represents the official early Commonwealth style used for these denominations. The coin itself was struck in bronze, a durable alloy made mainly of copper mixed with small amounts of tin and zinc. Bronze was widely used for low-denomination coins because it was strong enough to survive heavy circulation while still being inexpensive to produce. The coin has a plain edge and a diameter typical for halfpennies of the period. When freshly minted, the bronze surface would have had a rich reddish tone, but after decades of circulation, most surviving examples have turned dark brown or chocolate in color. What makes the 1916 mule so special is the accidental pairing of the dies used during production. At the mint, dies were normally prepared carefully to match the correct obverse and reverse combination. However, in this case, a die intended for a different setup was mistakenly used with the halfpenny reverse. The error went unnoticed for a short time, allowing a small number of these coins to be struck and released into circulation before the problem was discovered. Because these coins entered normal circulation, they were used by everyday Australians for many years. They passed through shops, public transport, markets, and banks just like any other coin of the period. As a result, many surviving examples today show heavy wear. The portrait of the king may appear flattened, and parts of the lettering may be faint or partially worn away. Scratches, rim knocks, and dark toning are also common on coins that spent decades in circulation. Normally, collectors prefer coins in excellent condition, but for extremely rare varieties like the 1916 Halfpenny Mule, even very worn pieces attract serious attention. The rarity of the die error itself is far more important than the coin's appearance. Specialists understand that most examples were used for many years before their significance was recognized, so high-grade survivors are exceptionally rare. Authenticating a coin like this is extremely important because of its high value. Experienced numismatists examine the design alignment, lettering style, and die characteristics carefully to confirm that the coin is a genuine mule. Professional grading services are often used to certify these coins before they are sold through major auctions or high-value private sales. Condition still plays a major role in determining value. A heavily circulated coin with very strong wear may still be worth a substantial amount because so few examples exist. Coins that retain clearer details in the king's portrait, sharper lettering in Commonwealth of Australia, and a more defined denomination can command much higher prices. As the coin approaches higher grades with less wear and stronger surfaces, the value can increase dramatically. Collectors around the world recognize this coin as one of the most famous Australian minting errors. It represents an unusual moment in the mint's production history, where a simple die mistake created a numismatic rarity that would later become highly desirable among collectors and investors. Because the coin sits at the intersection of rarity, history, and error collecting, it continues to attract attention from both Australian specialists and international buyers. When we look at the market value, the price range can vary widely depending on the coin's grade and authenticity. Even examples in poor or damaged condition can still attract significant interest from collectors simply because genuine specimens are extremely hard to find. Mid-grade examples with stronger design details can reach much higher price levels, especially when offered through respected dealers or auctions. The most dramatic results appear when a confirmed example surfaces in strong collectible condition. These coins rarely come onto the market, so when they do, bidding competition can become intense. Advanced collectors who specialize in Australian Commonwealth coinage often wait years for the chance to purchase one. Because of this strong demand and extreme rarity, high-profile auction sales have pushed the value of the 1916 Australian Halfpenny Mule to astonishing levels. In top collectible condition, examples have achieved prices approaching $400,000, showing just how powerful rarity and collector demand can be in the world of numismatics. Even when the coin is worn or in poor condition, the possibility of owning such a legendary minting error still attracts serious buyers. Stories like this remind collectors that incredible treasures can sometimes hide in the most ordinary places. Old coin collections, inherited coin boxes, and forgotten jars of change have surprised many people with rare discoveries in the past. Coins that once passed quietly through everyday transactions can later become historic collectibles worth life-changing amounts of money. Next up, a small, dark, almost forgotten coin can sometimes hide an unbelievable story, and that is exactly the case with the 1917 Australian Commonwealth One Halfpenny. At first glance, it might look like nothing more than an old, dirty black coin that spent decades in circulation. Many people would ignore it completely because of its worn appearance. But experienced collectors know that coins from the early Commonwealth period, especially those struck during the First World War era, can carry remarkable value and collector demand. Even a rough-looking piece like this can turn out to be an important collectible when the date, originality, and rarity line up perfectly. The 1917 One Halfpenny belongs to the early bronze coinage issued by Australia after the formation of the Commonwealth. These coins were produced when Australia was still developing its own national coin identity while remaining connected to the British Empire. The denomination One Halfpenny represented the smallest everyday coin used widely in daily life. Bought simple goods, paid for small services, and passed through millions of hands across Australia during the early 20th century. Looking closely at the obverse of the coin, you will see the portrait of King George V facing left. This portrait became one of the most recognizable royal designs used across British Empire coinage during that period. The image was created by the well-known sculptor Sir Edgar Bertram Mackennal, and his design shows the king wearing a simple crown portrait style with detailed hair and facial structure. Around the portrait is the Latin legend reading Georgius VDGBRITT, OMN Rex FDIND, Imp, which declares George V as King and Emperor of India. Even when coins are heavily circulated, parts of this lettering usually remain visible and help confirm the coin's authenticity and era. The reverse side carries the classic early Commonwealth halfpenny design. In the center appears the denomination clearly written as 1 halfpenny. Surrounding this is the inscription Commonwealth of Australia, forming a circular border around the coin. At the bottom sits the year 1917, marking the exact moment this coin entered Australian monetary history. The entire design is framed with a ring of small beads along the rim, a decorative detail commonly used on coins of that period to protect the lettering and give the coin a finished appearance. This coin was struck in bronze, an alloy primarily made from copper with small percentages of tin and zinc. Bronze was chosen because it was strong, relatively inexpensive, and capable of surviving heavy daily use. When these coins were freshly minted, they had a bright reddish-brown color. However, after many decades of handling, moisture exposure, and environmental effects, the surface often darkens dramatically. This is why many surviving examples today appear dark brown, deep chocolate, or even almost black. The particular coin described as being in dirty black condition tells a clear story about its life in circulation. Over many years, the original copper surface oxidizes and reacts with air and moisture, creating darker toning. Dirt, oils from hands, and environmental exposure can also build up on the coin's surface. While this may make the coin look unattractive to the average person, collectors often appreciate natural aging because it proves the coin has not been artificially cleaned or altered. Condition in coin collecting is always a key factor. A coin described as being in dirty black condition usually falls into the lower circulated grades. That means the coin may show heavy wear across the king's portrait, flattened lettering in some areas, and reduced detail across the design. The rim might show small knocks from years of use, and the surface may appear uneven or rough from environmental exposure. Despite this, collectors still carefully evaluate whether important design elements remain visible. Even heavily worn coins can still carry strong collector value if the date and type are important. For early Australian bronze coinage, many examples circulated intensely because these were the coins people used most frequently for everyday purchases. As a result, finding pieces that survived in higher grades is very difficult. Many collectors accept circulated examples simply because better ones are rarely available. The year 1917 itself sits in a fascinating period of Australian history. The world was deeply involved in the First World War, and economic conditions influenced mint production across the British Empire. Metal resources, mint priorities, and supply chains were all affected by wartime conditions. Coins produced during this time reflect an era when nations were focused on survival, industry, and supporting the war effort. Because of these historical circumstances, coins from these years attract strong interest from historians and collectors alike. Another interesting point is that many early bronze coins were used continuously for decades before being withdrawn. Unlike modern coins that are often replaced quickly, these halfpennies remained in circulation for generations. That means a coin minted in 1917 might have still been used by Australians in the 1940s or even 1950s. This long life explains why many pieces show extremely heavy wear today. Collectors usually study several factors when evaluating a coin like this. They examine the clarity of the date, the strength of the lettering around the rim, the remaining detail in the king's portrait, and the condition of the surface. Even when the coin is dark or dirty, if the important features remain visible and the coin is genuine, it can still be an exciting find. The global market for Australian coins has grown significantly in recent years. Collectors in Australia, Europe, North America, and Asia actively compete for rare early Commonwealth pieces. As interest continues to grow, even coins that once seemed ordinary are now being studied much more carefully. Auction houses and professional dealers regularly highlight early Australian bronze coins because they represent the foundation of the country's national coinage. When we talk about value, the range can change dramatically depending on the coin's condition and collector demand. A typical circulated 1917 halfpenny might only sell for a modest amount if it is very common and heavily worn. However, when a particular piece stands out due to rarity, special die characteristics, or historical importance, the price can rise far beyond what most people expect. Even coins in rough, dark, or dirty condition can attract serious attention if they represent a scarce collectible example. Mid-grade pieces that show stronger design details and less wear often command significantly higher prices among collectors who want quality examples for their collections. As the condition improves into higher grades, the coin becomes far more desirable and competition between collectors increases. At the highest end of the market, rare early Commonwealth halfpennies can achieve astonishing auction results. When a well-preserved example or a particularly desirable variety appears, collectors and investors may compete aggressively. In some remarkable cases, examples connected to the 1917 Australian one halfpenny have reached values approaching $85,000 in the collector market, proving that even a small bronze coin with a dark, worn appearance can represent a truly valuable piece of numismatic history. That possibility is exactly what makes coin collecting so exciting. Somewhere in old jars of coins, inherited family collections, antique shops, or forgotten drawers, rare pieces like this can still be waiting to be discovered. Many valuable coins were once dismissed simply because they looked old, dirty, or worn, yet careful examination later revealed their true importance. Next up, the 1919 Australian Commonwealth One Halfpenny is a perfect example of how a small bronze coin that once passed through everyday hands can later become an important collectible worth tens of thousands of dollars. Many people would overlook a coin like this immediately because of its rough condition, but experienced collectors know that early Commonwealth bronze coins from the 1910s deserve very careful attention. The year 1919 places this coin at a remarkable moment in world history. It was struck just after the end of the First World War, a time when economies were recovering, industries were rebuilding, and the demand for circulating coinage remained extremely high. Australia was still relatively young as a Commonwealth nation, and its coinage system was continuing to develop. Bronze halfpennies like this one were an essential part of everyday commerce. These small coins were used constantly by ordinary people to buy basic goods, pay small fees, and handle daily transactions. Looking closely at the front of the coin, known as the obverse, you will see the familiar portrait of King George V. The king faces left, and his portrait was created by the famous sculptor Sir Edgar Bertram Mackennal. His design became one of the most widely used royal portraits across the British Empire during the early 20th century. Around the portrait runs the Latin inscription Georgius VDGBRITT, OMN Rex FDIND, Imp, which declares George V as King and Emperor of India. Even when coins have experienced decades of heavy wear, parts of this lettering usually remain visible and help collectors confirm the identity and period of the coin. Turning the coin over to the reverse side, you will find the classic early Commonwealth design used for the halfpenny denomination. In the center, the denomination is written clearly as 1 halfpenny. Surrounding this central wording is the circular inscription Commonwealth of Australia. At the bottom of the design sits the year 1919, marking the exact year this coin entered circulation. Around the outer edge of the coin is a ring of small raised beads forming a protective border that helps shield the lettering and design from wear. The coin was produced in bronze, the traditional alloy used for many low-value coins during that period. Bronze consists mostly of copper combined with small amounts of tin and zinc. When freshly minted, these coins would have shown a bright reddish-brown surface with strong metallic shine. Over many years, however, exposure to air, moisture, and constant handling gradually changes the appearance of the metal. The surface darkens, sometimes becoming deep brown or almost black. The example described as being in bad condition tells the story of a coin that spent a very long time in circulation. The portrait of King George V may appear flattened, with much of the fine detail worn away. Parts of the lettering around the rim may be weak or partially faded. The surface may show scratches, rim marks, or uneven coloring caused by decades of handling and environmental exposure. In many cases, coins like this have passed through thousands of transactions before finally leaving circulation. In the world of numismatics, condition always influences value, but rarity and historical interest can sometimes outweigh heavy wear. Early Australian bronze coins were used heavily because they were the smallest denomination available for daily purchases. That means many of them experienced extreme wear before collectors began saving them. As a result, finding early examples that survived in strong condition is very difficult. For this reason, collectors often accept coins in lower grades if the date itself is important. Even when the surfaces are worn and dark, a genuine early Commonwealth halfpenny still represents a piece of Australian monetary history. Many collectors enjoy these coins not just for their value, but for the story they carry. Every scratch and worn surface is evidence that the coin traveled through real everyday life more than a century ago. Another reason these coins remain interesting is the gradual growth of global interest in Australian numismatics. Collectors around the world have started paying closer attention to early Commonwealth coinage because it represents the beginning of Australia's independent monetary identity. As demand grows internationally, coins that were once overlooked are now being studied, graded, and sold through major auctions. When experts examine a coin like the 1919 halfpenny, they look carefully at several details. The clarity of the date is extremely important because it confirms the coin's year. The strength of the lettering around the rim is also checked to determine how much original detail remains. The surface color and toning are examined to see whether the coin has natural aging or signs of cleaning or damage. Even a worn coin can be quite appealing if the surfaces show natural patina from long-term circulation. Collectors also study the edges and rim of the coin. Because halfpennies were used so frequently, many of them develop small knocks or flattening along the edge. These details help experts estimate how much time the coin spent in everyday use. Interestingly, some collectors actually prefer coins with honest wear because it demonstrates the coin's authenticity and long history. The market value of a coin like the 1919 Australian One Halfpenny can vary widely depending on condition and collector demand. Extremely worn coins with very little remaining detail may still sell for modest amounts because of their historical interest. Slightly better examples that retain clearer lettering and stronger design features usually attract more serious collectors. As the grade improves and more original detail remains visible, the value can increase dramatically. Coins that show stronger portrait features, clearer inscriptions, and smoother surfaces become much more desirable. Advanced collectors building high-quality sets of early Commonwealth coins are often willing to compete strongly for the best surviving examples. The most dramatic price levels appear when a particularly desirable example enters the auction market. Auction houses that specialize in rare coins often feature early Australian bronze pieces as important historical collectibles. When collectors recognize that an example is scarce or especially attractive, bidding competition can become intense. Because of this growing demand and limited supply, certain examples connected to the 1919 Australian One Halfpenny have achieved remarkable prices in the collector market. In strong collectible condition and with the right collector interest, coins from this issue have been known to reach values around $76,000. That kind of price proves that even a small bronze coin, originally worth only a tiny fraction of a pound, can transform into a significant investment and historical artifact over time. This is exactly what makes coin collecting so fascinating. A coin that appears worn, dirty, and unimportant can sometimes hold extraordinary value simply because of its rarity, history, and demand among collectors. Many incredible discoveries have been made by people who decided to take a closer look at old coins sitting quietly in drawers, jars, or inherited collections. So the next time you come across an old bronze coin from Australia, especially one dated in the early 1900s, do not dismiss it too quickly. Study the details carefully, check the date, and learn about the varieties that collectors search for. The world of numismatics is full of surprises, and sometimes the most valuable discoveries come from coins that others ignored. Next up, the 1921 Australian Commonwealth One Halfpenny is a perfect example of this. At first glance, a coin in bad condition might appear almost worthless. The surface may be dark, the details may be worn down, and the coin may look like it has been through a century of hard use. But experienced collectors understand something very important. Early Australian bronze coins from the beginning of the Commonwealth period can be far more valuable than they appear, even when their condition is far from perfect. The 1921 One Halfpenny belongs to the early generation of coins produced after Australia established its own national coinage system in the early 20th century. These coins were part of everyday life for Australians for many decades. The halfpenny was the smallest unit of currency commonly used in daily transactions, meaning it passed through countless hands in shops, markets, and public transport systems. Because of that heavy usage, most halfpennies from this era survived only in worn condition. Looking carefully at the obverse side of the coin, we see the portrait of King George V. The king is shown facing left, a design created by the well-known sculptor Sir Edgar Bertram Mackennal. His portrait became one of the defining images of early 20th century coinage across the British Empire. Surrounding the portrait is the Latin inscription Georgievsvdgbrit OMN Rex FDIND Imp, which announces George V as King and Emperor of India. Even when a coin has experienced decades of circulation, parts of this lettering often remain visible and help collectors confirm the coin's authenticity and era. Turning to the reverse side, the design reflects the classic style used on many early Commonwealth halfpennies. In the center, the denomination is clearly written as 1 halfpenny. Encircling this wording is the inscription Commonwealth of Australia, forming a strong border around the coin's central design. At the bottom of the coin sits the date 1921, which marks the exact year this coin was minted and released into circulation. Around the outer edge runs a ring of small raised beads that frame the entire design and help protect the lettering from excessive wear. The coin itself was struck in bronze, a durable metal mixture used widely for lower value coinage during that period. Bronze is primarily made from copper, with small percentages of tin and zinc added to strengthen the metal. When these coins were first produced, they had a bright reddish-brown color and a smooth metallic shine. However, over many decades of use, bronze coins naturally change in appearance. Exposure to air, moisture, and constant handling slowly darkens the surface, creating shades of deep brown or even nearly black. A 1921 halfpenny described as being in bad condition usually shows clear signs of long circulation. The king's portrait may appear flattened, with much of the fine detail worn away by years of use. The lettering around the rim may be weaker in certain areas, and the coin's surface might display scratches, marks, or uneven toning. These characteristics are common for coins that remained in everyday circulation for a very long time. Interestingly, many collectors appreciate this kind of honest wear because it reflects the real journey of the coin. Each mark and worn surface represents the coin's life moving through shops, markets, railway stations, and households more than 100 years ago. In other words, the coin is not just a piece of metal, it is a physical connection to Australia's economic and social history. Coins from the early 1920s were produced during a time when Australia was adjusting to the aftermath of the First World War. The country was rebuilding industries, supporting returning soldiers, and stabilizing its economy. Everyday coinage was essential during this period, and bronze coins like the halfpenny played a crucial role in daily trade. Because these coins were used constantly, very few people thought about saving them for the future. As a result, most surviving examples today are heavily circulated. Finding coins from this era in extremely high condition is extremely difficult because they simply were not preserved carefully at the time. That scarcity of well-preserved pieces is exactly what attracts collectors today. When collectors examine a 1921 halfpenny, they look closely at several important details. The date must be clearly identifiable, since the year is one of the key factors in determining value. Experts also examine the clarity of the lettering in Commonwealth of Australia, the strength of the central denomination, and the remaining features in the king's portrait. Even when the coin is worn, these elements can still provide valuable information about its grade and authenticity. The rim and edge of the coin are also inspected carefully. Because halfpennies were small and frequently handled, many developed small rim dents or flattening along the edge. These marks tell a story about how the coin was used during its lifetime. For collectors, understanding these details helps build a clearer picture of the coin's history. In recent years, interest in early Australian coinage has grown dramatically. Collectors from Australia, as well as international numismatists, have started paying closer attention to Commonwealth bronze coins. These pieces represent the early years of Australia's national identity in currency, making them historically significant as well as collectible. Another factor driving demand is the limited number of surviving coins from these early years. Many coins were lost, melted, or damaged beyond recognition over the decades. As a result, each surviving example becomes part of a smaller and more valuable pool of collectibles. When discussing value, the condition of the coin always plays a major role. A 1921 halfpenny in extremely worn condition may still hold modest collector value simply because of its age and historical importance. Coins that retain stronger details and clearer lettering typically command higher prices. As the grade improves, the coin becomes more desirable to collectors who are trying to build complete sets of early Australian bronze coinage. But the real excitement happens when particularly rare or well-preserved examples appear in the collector market. Auction houses that specialize in numismatic material often feature early Commonwealth coins as key historical pieces. When collectors recognize that an example is scarce or especially desirable, bidding competition can become intense. Because of this strong demand and limited supply, certain examples associated with the 1921 Australian one halfpenny have reached remarkable values in the coin market. In some cases, collectors have been willing to pay prices approaching $80,000 for exceptional or highly desirable examples. That kind of value is extraordinary when you consider that the coin originally represented only a tiny fraction of everyday spending power. This dramatic increase in value highlights one of the most exciting aspects of coin collecting. Objects that once seemed ordinary can transform into highly valuable historical artifacts over time. A small bronze coin that once bought a simple item in a local shop can eventually become a prized treasure within the numismatic community. Stories like this remind us that valuable coins are not always shiny, perfect, or immediately impressive. Sometimes they are dark, worn, and overlooked. Yet within those old surfaces lies more than a century of history and the potential for surprising value. That is why it is always worth examining old coins carefully. Look closely at the dates, study the designs, and learn about the coins that circulated during the early years of Australia's Commonwealth era. Hidden among ordinary pieces of change could be coins that collectors around the world would be excited to own. Next up, the 1932 Australian Commonwealth One Halfpenny is one of those coins that many people would quickly ignore, especially if it appears worn, dark, and in bad condition. But for serious collectors, the year on a coin can completely change its importance. Even a rough example from the early Commonwealth period can carry enormous historical and collector value, and the 1932 halfpenny is a fascinating reminder that sometimes the smallest and most overlooked coins can become powerful treasures in the numismatic world. By the early 1930s, Australia had already been producing its own Commonwealth coinage for several decades. Bronze halfpennies were still one of the most commonly used coins in everyday life. They were the coins people used for small purchases, public transport fares, basic groceries, and other simple daily transactions. Because of their low value, halfpennies were rarely saved by the public. Instead, they circulated heavily through shops, markets, and households across the country, which explains why so many surviving pieces today show strong signs of wear. On the obverse of the 1932 halfpenny, you will find the portrait of King George V. The king faces left, wearing a simple crown portrait style that became a familiar image on coins throughout the British Empire. This portrait was designed by the respected sculptor Sir Edgar Bertram Mackennal. His design captured the king in a formal yet realistic style, with carefully shaped hair, facial features, and royal dignity. Surrounding the portrait is the Latin inscription Georgius VDGBRITT, OMN Rex FDIND, Imp, which declares George V as King of all the Britons and Emperor of India. Even on coins that have spent many years in circulation, parts of this inscription can still be seen around the rim. When the coin is turned over to the reverse side, the design reflects the classic Commonwealth style used on Australian halfpennies during that era. In the center appears the denomination clearly written as 1 halfpenny. Around this wording is the circular inscription Commonwealth of Australia, forming a strong border that frames the design. At the bottom sits the year 1932, the detail that collectors always examine first when identifying coins from this period. The outer rim is decorated with a ring of small raised beads that give the coin structure and help protect the lettering from heavy wear. The coin itself was struck in bronze, the traditional metal used for low-denomination coins throughout the early 20th century. Bronze is mainly copper mixed with smaller amounts of tin and zinc, which gives it strength and durability. When these coins were first minted, they had a bright reddish color with a fresh metallic shine. However, as decades passed and the coins continued circulating, their surfaces naturally changed. Exposure to air, moisture, and constant handling caused the copper alloy to darken gradually. Today, many examples appear deep brown or even nearly black. A 1932 halfpenny described as being in bad condition usually shows clear evidence of a long life in circulation. The king's portrait may appear flattened, with much of the finer detail worn away. The lettering around the rim might be weak in certain areas, and the beaded border may show signs of smoothing from decades of handling. The coin may also display scratches, small dents along the rim, or uneven coloring caused by natural aging. While these signs might make the coin look unattractive to the average person, collectors understand that such wear often reflects genuine history rather than damage. Coins like this tell a story about everyday life during the early 20th century. In the 1930s, Australia was dealing with the economic effects of the Great Depression. Money was extremely important to households, and small denominations like the halfpenny played a vital role in daily spending. These coins traveled through countless hands as people bought bread, paid for newspapers, or handled small market purchases. Every mark and worn surface on a surviving coin reflects those years of real economic activity. Because halfpennies were used so heavily, very few people thought about saving them in perfect condition. Collecting coins was not as common among the general public during that time, especially for low-value pieces. As a result, most coins from this era were simply used until they became too worn and were eventually withdrawn from circulation. That is one of the main reasons collectors today often encounter early bronze coins in lower grades. When numismatists study a 1932 halfpenny, they focus on several key details. The date must be clearly identifiable, since it determines the coin's historical placement. The strength of the lettering in Commonwealth of Australia is examined to evaluate how much wear the coin has experienced. Experts also look closely at the remaining features in the king's portrait and the clarity of the denomination in the center of the reverse. Even a worn coin can still retain enough detail to make it desirable to collectors. Another important element is the natural toning of the bronze surface. Many collectors actually prefer coins that show original aging rather than artificially cleaned surfaces. A dark brown or black patina can indicate that the coin has not been altered, which adds to its authenticity and historical character. Interest in early Australian Commonwealth coinage has grown strongly in recent years. Collectors both within Australia and around the world have started paying greater attention to these historic pieces. They represent the development of Australia's independent monetary identity while still reflecting the influence of the British Empire. For many numismatists, building a complete set of early Australian bronze coins has become an exciting challenge. As demand grows and surviving coins remain limited, the market value for certain dates and examples continues to rise. Even coins that appear worn can still attract attention if the date is significant or if the coin has desirable characteristics. Mid-grade examples with clearer details usually command higher prices, especially among collectors who want visually appealing pieces for their collections. But the real excitement appears when particularly scarce or highly sought-after examples reach the auction market. Auction houses that specialize in rare coins often highlight early Commonwealth pieces because they combine historical importance with strong collector demand. When a desirable example is offered, collectors and investors may compete aggressively to secure it. Because of this demand and the limited number of surviving coins, certain examples connected to the 1932 Australian one halfpenny have reached extraordinary values in the collector market. In some cases, strong collector interest and scarcity have pushed prices to levels around $125,000. For a coin that originally represented just a tiny everyday amount of money, that kind of value is truly remarkable. This dramatic transformation from simple pocket change to valuable collectible is exactly what makes coin collecting so exciting. A coin that once bought a small, everyday item can eventually become a historical artifact worth thousands of times its original value. The journey of that coin from ordinary circulation to collector treasure is what fascinates numismatists all over the world. Stories like this remind us that valuable coins are not always shiny or perfectly preserved. Sometimes they're dark, worn, and quietly hiding in old collections, jars of coins, or forgotten drawers. Many important discoveries have been made by people who simply took the time to examine their coins more carefully. So whenever you come across old Australian bronze coins, especially those from the early 20th century, it is always worth taking a closer look. Check the date carefully, study the design details, and learn about the coins that played a role in Australia's monetary history. The coin you are holding might be far more interesting and valuable than it first appears. Keep exploring your collections, keep searching through old coins, and keep learning about the hidden treasures of numismatics. And if you enjoy discovering stories behind rare and valuable coins like this one, stay connected with the Coin Studio, where every episode uncovers another remarkable piece of history waiting to be found.